The summer sun was beating down on the pristine tree-lined streets of Oak Ridge Estates, casting long, elegant shadows across the manicured lawns. Oak Ridge was the kind of neighborhood where the houses sat far back from the road, the sprinklers ran on synchronized timers, and the median income was high enough that people rarely locked their front doors. It was a quiet, affluent suburb of Westridge, a place where trouble was something you watched on the evening news, not something that happened in your driveway. Elias Montgomery loved the quiet. At middle age, quiet was exactly what he had spent many years earning. Elias was a man who carried his years of hard work in the broadness of his shoulders and the observant, calm focus in his dark eyes. He was wearing faded Levi's, a white, sweat-stained cotton t-shirt, and old sneakers. In his right hand, he held a soapy sponge. In his left, a garden hose. Before him, gleaming under the afternoon sun, was his pride and joy, a fully restored cherry red 1969 Chevrolet Chevelle SS. He had spent several years bringing the classic muscle car back to life, pouring blood, sweat, and a small fortune into the engine block and the flawless paint job. He was treating the chrome bumper with meticulous care, the smell of premium car wax mixing with the scent of freshly cut grass from the neighbor's yard. This afternoon was supposed to be a rare moment of absolute peace. A few days earlier, Elias had moved into the four-bedroom house following a divorce that had amicably but heavily split his assets. On the following Monday morning, he would put on a freshly pressed uniform, pin a newly minted silver badge to his chest, and walk into the 42nd Precinct as its new watch commander and sergeant. After many grueling years working undercover narcotics and gang units in the city's toughest districts, this promotion and this beautiful home were his rewards. 2 blocks away, a Westridge police cruiser was rolling slowly past the sprawling properties. At the wheel was Officer Logan Pierce. Pierce was a young officer, a couple of years out of the academy, and possessed a dangerous combination of soaring ambition and staggering arrogance. He had close-cropped blonde hair, a jawline he frequently clenched to look authoritative, and a deep-seated belief that his intuition was sharper than any training manual. He was desperate to make detective before he hit 30, and he spent every shift hunting for the kind of high-profile felony bust that looked good on a promotion board. Riding in the passenger seat was Officer Harold Shaw. Shaw was a tired, graying veteran who was close to his pension. He had seen enough of the streets to know that most of the job was just talking to people like human beings. He had been paired with Pierce for a few months, and he spent most of his shifts trying to rein in the rookie's hyper-aggressive tendencies. "Take a left on Elmwood," Shaw murmured, taking a sip from his lukewarm convenience store coffee. "Let's just cruise the perimeter and head back toward the commercial district. Nothing happens up here except noise complaints about pool boys. Criminals know we don't patrol up here." "That's exactly why we should," Pierce replied, his eyes scanning the driveways like a hawk looking for field mice. "Opportunists love neighborhoods like this. Rich people leave their garages open, keys in the ignitions." Pierce trailed off. His foot tapped the brakes, slowing the cruiser to a crawl. Halfway down the block, sitting in the wide paved driveway of a sprawling colonial-style home, was the cherry-red Chevelle, and standing next to it, wiping down the hood, was Elias Montgomery. Pierce's eyes narrowed. The gears in his head, entirely stripped of logic and entirely fueled by racial bias and assumption, began to turn. He looked at the multi-million-dollar house. He looked at the immaculate classic car. Then he looked at the black man in a faded t-shirt washing it. "Look at that," Pierce muttered, pointing a finger against the steering wheel. Shaw leaned forward, squinting through the glare of the windshield. "Look at what? A guy washing his car?" "You think a guy dressed like a day laborer owns a car like that?" Pierce said, his voice dropping into a register of forced authority. "You think he owns that house?" Shaw sighed heavily, the kind of deep, weary exhale that came from years of dealing with rookies who watched too many action movies. "Pierce, stop. It's a quiet afternoon. The guy is washing a car in a driveway. There's no broken glass, no alarms, no panicked homeowners. Leave it alone." "I'm running the plates," Pierce said, ignoring his partner. He typed the Chevelle's license plate into the cruiser's mobile data terminal. "Pierce, I swear to God, do not go looking for trouble where there is none," Shaw warned, his tone hardening. The screen blinked. The car was registered to an Elias Montgomery, with an address listed right there on Elmwood Drive. But Pierce didn't bother to click into the full DMV profile to check the owner's photograph. He didn't check the occupation code. He only saw the name. "Vehicle is registered to the address," Pierce noted, but his grip on the steering wheel only tightened. Could be a detailer, could be a mechanic taking it for a joyride, or maybe he broke into the house, found the keys, and is prepping it to drive off. Shaw stared at him in disbelief. "He's washing it with a sponge, Logan. Car thieves don't usually apply a coat of wax before a grand theft auto." "I'm initiating a field interview," Pierce declared. Before Shaw could order him to keep driving, Pierce cranked the steering wheel hard to the right. The cruiser surged forward, its tires squeaking against the asphalt as Pierce pulled it aggressively into Elias's driveway. He parked at a harsh angle, effectively blocking the Chevelle and the end of the driveway so no vehicle could leave. Elias Montgomery didn't flinch. He heard the heavy engine of the cruiser, heard the tires on his concrete, but he didn't immediately turn around. He calmly finished wiping down the driver's side mirror, turned off the garden hose nozzle, and then slowly turned to face the officers. Many years on the force had trained Elias's eyes to take in an entire scene in fractions of a second. He noted the cruiser's position, a blocking maneuver, tactically sound but legally aggressive for a non-emergency stop. He noted the numbers on the bumper, 42nd Precinct, his new precinct. He looked at the two officers. The passenger, an older white cop, looked profoundly annoyed and embarrassed. The driver, a young squared-off cop, was already out of the vehicle, his hand resting instinctively on his duty belt right next to his sidearm. Elias's pulse remained perfectly steady, but a cold, hard realization settled into his chest. He knew exactly what this was. He had spent his whole life navigating the treacherous waters of being a black man in America, and his entire career trying to weed out cops who policed with their prejudices instead of their brains. The rookie was puffing his chest out, marching up the driveway. The lesson was about to begin. "Drop the sponge and step away from the vehicle," Officer Pierce commanded. His voice was loud, projecting across the quiet suburban lawns. Elias looked at the soapy sponge in his hand, then back to Pierce. He didn't drop it. Instead, he calmly tossed it into the red plastic bucket sitting by his feet. He wiped his wet hands on his jeans, maintaining a relaxed, non-threatening posture. "Good afternoon, officer," Elias said, his voice deep, smooth, and utterly devoid of fear. "Can I help you with something?" Pierce stopped about 6 feet away, invading the natural boundary of the property. "Whose car is this?" he demanded, his eyes darting from Elias to the interior of the Chevelle, looking for a popped ignition or broken steering column. "It's mine," Elias answered simply. Pierce scoffed, a short, ugly sound of disbelief. "Right, and I suppose you own the house too." "I do," Elias replied, "moved in recently." Officer Shaw had stepped out of the passenger side, hanging back near the rear quarter panel of the cruiser. He was watching Elias intently. There was something about the man's stance. He wasn't shifting his weight. He wasn't nervously glancing around. He held his ground with the rooted, balanced posture of a man who had faced down actual gunfire, not just a belligerent rookie. Shaw felt a cold knot of dread form in his stomach. "Sir," Shaw called out, trying to introduce some de-escalation into the mix. "We're just doing neighborhood checks we get a lot of complaints about." "I'm handling this, Shaw," Pierce snapped over his shoulder, blatantly disrespecting his senior partner in front of a civilian, a major violation of police decorum. Pierce turned his attention back to Elias. "I need to see some identification, driver's license, right now." Elias didn't move. In his head, the watch commander was already writing the internal affairs report. Lack of reasonable suspicion, escalation without cause, unprofessional conduct. He wanted to see how far Pierce would dig his own grave before hitting rock bottom. "Officer," Elias said, his tone shifting from polite to firmly instructive, "I am standing on private property, my private property. I am washing a car. Unless you are investigating a specific crime or you have reasonable articulable suspicion that I have committed one, you have no legal authority to demand my identification under the Fourth Amendment. So, I will ask you again, am I suspected of a crime?" Pierce's face flushed bright red. He wasn't used to civilians, especially black civilians, quoting constitutional law back to him with such chilling authority. His ego, fragile and easily bruised, took over completely. "You're acting highly suspicious, which gives me probable cause to identify you," Pierce lied, stepping closer. "Now you're either going to hand me your ID, or I'm going to detain you for obstructing an investigation." "Brad, back off," Shaw warned, stepping forward. "He's on his own property. We have no victim, no 911 call. Let's get back in the car." "He is uncooperative and exhibiting evasive behavior," Pierce barked, fully committing to the terrible path he had chosen. Elias looked Pierce dead in the eye. "I am not evading anything. I am answering your questions, but I will not surrender my constitutional rights just because my presence in this neighborhood makes you uncomfortable, officer." Elias paused, looking at the rookie's nameplate. Officer Pierce. The casual, unafraid way Elias read his name was the final straw for Pierce. The rookie interpreted Elias's calm, educated defiance as a threat to his authority. "Turn around and put your hands on the roof of the car," Pierce ordered, unbuttoning the leather strap over his handcuffs. "You're being detained." "On what charge?" Elias asked, not moving an inch. "Failure to identify and resisting a lawful order." "Neither of which apply here," Elias replied smoothly. "A lawful order requires lawful authority." "You are currently trespassing." Pierce lunged. He reached out and grabbed Elias's left arm, trying to wrench it behind his back in a pain compliance hold. For a fraction of a second, muscle memory almost took over. Elias had spent years taking down violent cartel members and armed gang enforcers. He could have broken Pierce's grip, swept his leg, and had the rookie pinned face down on the concrete in seconds. But Elias Montgomery was a professional. He knew that the moment he physically resisted, Pierce would draw his taser or his firearm. A black man fighting a white cop in a wealthy suburb only ended one way, regardless of who was in the right. So Elias went completely limp, offering zero physical resistance while keeping his eyes locked on Shaw. "I am not resisting," Elias said loudly and clearly, ensuring Shaw's body camera and Pierce captured the audio perfectly. "I am complying with your physical force under duress. I am noting that you have assaulted me on my own property without probable cause." Pierce aggressively pushed Elias against the side of the pristine Chevelle. Elias winced slightly, not from pain, but hoping his belt buckle didn't scratch the clear coat he had just polished. Click, click, click. The cold steel of the handcuffs snapped tight around Elias's wrists, locking his hands behind his back. "Logan, what the hell are you doing?" Shaw shouted, jogging up the driveway, his face pale. "Take those cuffs off him right now. Are you out of your mind?" "He was resisting," Pierce panted, his adrenaline spiking as he patted down Elias's pockets. "He refused to identify." "You can't arrest a man for standing in his driveway," Shaw yelled, looking around nervously. Across the street, the front door of a large beige house opened. Arthur Langford, a retired corporate lawyer and Elias's immediate neighbor, stepped out onto his porch. Arthur had met Elias recently when Elias helped him move a heavy mahogany credenza into his dining room. Arthur was currently holding a smartphone horizontally recording the entire interaction. Pierce ignored the neighbor. He reached into Elias's back right pocket and pulled out a worn leather wallet. "Let's see who you really are," Pierce sneered, flipping the wallet open. Elias stood silently against the car, his hands bound in cold steel. He felt the warm summer breeze against the back of his neck. He looked over his shoulder at Pierce and gave a small, almost imperceptible smile. "Go ahead, Officer Pierce," Elias said softly. "Look inside." Pierce opened the wallet to pull out the driver's license. But as he flipped the leather fold open, his fingers didn't touch plastic. They touched cold, heavy metal. Pinned to the inside flap of the leather wallet, gleaming brilliantly in the afternoon sun, was a Westridge Police Department sergeant's badge. Right below it was a laminated police ID card. The photo on the ID matched the man in handcuffs perfectly. The rank printed in bold black letters read Sergeant Elias Montgomery, Watch Commander 42nd Precinct. Pierce stopped breathing. The blood completely drained from his face, leaving him looking like a ghost standing in the midsummer heat. The trap had just snapped shut. The silence that fell over the driveway was absolute, heavy, and suffocating. The only sounds were the gentle hum of the neighbor's central air conditioning and the rhythmic chirp of a cicada in the nearby oak tree. Officer Logan Pierce stared at the silver shield pinned inside the leather wallet. His brain flat out refused to process the information. It was as if he were trying to read a language he didn't speak. He blinked hard, hoping that when his eyes opened, the badge would vanish, replaced by a fake ID or parole card, anything that would validate the terrible decision he had just made. But the badge remained, and beneath it the bold, unforgiving text of the police identification card stared back at him, Sergeant Elias Montgomery. Pierce's hands began to tremble. The wallet slipped from his fingers, hitting the concrete driveway with a soft, pathetic slap. Officer Harold Shaw, who had been watching his partner's face morph from aggressive arrogance to sheer, unadulterated terror, stepped forward. He looked down at the dropped wallet. The silver badge caught the sunlight, flashing like a warning beacon. Shaw closed his eyes and let out a long, shuddering breath. "You idiot," he whispered, the words carrying the weight of 1,000 exhausted shifts. "You absolute arrogant idiot." "So, sir," Pierce stammered, his voice cracking. He reached out with a trembling hand toward the handcuffs binding Elias's wrists. I had no idea. It was a misunderstanding. Let me just get these off you, Sergeant." "Step back," Elias commanded. His voice wasn't loud, but it possessed a terrifying steel-edged authority that froze Pierce in his tracks. "Sergeant, please," Pierce pleaded, his tough guy facade completely shattered, revealing the panicked young officer underneath. "I didn't know who you were. You weren't in uniform. I was just doing my job." Elias slowly turned his head to look over his shoulder, his eyes locking onto the young officer. "That is exactly the problem, Officer Pierce. You didn't know who I was. You thought I was just a civilian you could bully. You thought I was someone who didn't know his rights, someone you could intimidate into submission to pad your daily activity report. The fact that I am your commanding officer doesn't make this a mistake. It makes it a revelation of exactly how you police this community." Shaw stepped in, looking physically sick. "Sergeant Montgomery, I'm so sorry. I tried to call him off." "I know you did, Officer Shaw," Elias said, his tone softening a fraction for the veteran cop. "Your body camera is rolling, correct?" "Yes, sir. It's been rolling since we pulled up." Good. Leave it on, Elias instructed. And Pierce, do not touch those handcuffs. You put them on. They stay on until a supervisor arrives to document this scene. Pierce looked like he was going to vomit. Sergeant, please, if we call a supervisor, this goes to internal affairs. It's my career. Your career ended the moment you laid hands on a citizen without probable cause, Elias replied coldly. Officer Shaw, get on the radio, call the shift supervisor, tell him you need him at this address immediately, code 3. Shaw didn't hesitate. He unclipped his shoulder mic. Unit 4 Adam to dispatch, requesting a patrol supervisor to our 20, expedite, we have an urgent situation. As the radio crackled with the dispatcher's acknowledgement, the sound of footsteps approaching on the asphalt drew their attention. Arthur Langford, the retired corporate lawyer from across the street, walked up to the edge of the driveway. He was still holding his smartphone, the red recording dot blinking steadily. Elias, everything all right over here? Arthur asked, his voice dripping with the kind of upper-class indignation that usually made police departments very nervous. I've got the entire interaction recorded, from the moment they blocked you in to the moment he assaulted you. Pierce whipped his head around, his eyes wide with horror as he realized a civilian had recorded the entire unconstitutional arrest. Thank you, Arthur, Elias said calmly. I'd appreciate it if you held on to that footage. Internal Affairs will be needing a copy. Internal Affairs? Arthur repeated, raising an eyebrow. I'll be happy to provide it, and if you need a lawyer, Elias, I know the best civil rights litigators in the state. I appreciate it, Arthur, but I don't think I'll need them, Elias replied. I handle my own. For the next several minutes, nobody spoke. Elias stood patiently against his Chevelle, his hands locked behind his back. Pierce paced near the cruiser, hyperventilating, his hands pulling at his own hair as the reality of his actions crushed down on him. He had arrested the new watch commander of the 42nd Precinct. Worse, he had done it illegally on camera in front of witnesses. The distant wail of sirens pierced the suburban quiet, growing louder and more urgent with each passing second. A white Ford Explorer with supervisor chevrons on the doors tore onto Elmwood Drive, its light bar painting the neighborhood in aggressive flashes of red and blue. The SUV screeched to a halt right behind Unit 4 Adam. The door flew open, and Captain Richard Donnelly stepped out. Donnelly was a massive man in his late 50s, a veteran commander who did not tolerate foolishness in his ranks. He had heard the tension in Shaw's voice over the radio and expected to find a brawl, a barricaded suspect, or an officer injured. Instead, he found Officer Shaw standing at parade rest looking miserable. He found Officer Pierce leaning against the hood of the patrol car crying silently. And he found a black man in handcuffs leaning casually against a pristine classic car. Captain Donnelly marched up the driveway, his brow furrowed in deep confusion. Shaw, what the hell is going on here? Who is this? As Donnelly got closer, the features of the handcuffed man came into focus. The captain stopped dead in his tracks. Elias, Donnelly said, his voice a mixture of shock and disbelief. Elias Montgomery, good afternoon, Captain. Sorry, I'm not in a position to shake your hand. Captain Donnelly looked from Elias to the handcuffs to Pierce and back to Elias. His face turned a dangerous shade of crimson. Will someone tell me why the new sergeant of the 42nd Precinct is wearing department-issued steel in his own driveway? I can answer that, Captain, Elias said, his voice ringing with absolute clarity. Officer Pierce here observed me washing my vehicle, operating under the assumption that a black man in this neighborhood could not possibly own this property or this car. He initiated an unlawful detention, he trespassed on my property, demanded identification without reasonable suspicion of a crime, and when I politely informed him of my Fourth Amendment rights, he assaulted me, battered me against my vehicle, and placed me under false arrest. Donnelly turned slowly to look at Pierce. The look in the captain's eyes was lethal. Is this true, Pierce? Captain, I thought he was suspicious, Pierce sobbed, the tough cop act completely abandoned. I didn't know he was a cop. That right there is the crux of the issue, Captain, Elias interjected smoothly. He believes that if I were just a regular civilian, his actions would have been perfectly justified. Captain Donnelly didn't need to hear another word. He had spent decades trying to build community trust, and rookies like Pierce tore it down in a matter of seconds. Shaw, Donnelly barked, take those cuffs off the sergeant now. Shaw practically sprinted forward, pulling his handcuff key. Click, click, the steel jaws opened. Elias brought his arms forward, rubbing his wrists, rolling his shoulders to get the blood flowing again. Are you injured, Elias? Donnelly asked, his tone shifting to genuine concern. Just my pride, Richard, Elias said, using the captain's first name now that he was uncuffed. And maybe the wax job on the Chevelle. Donnelly turned his full, terrifying attention back to the rookie. Officer Pierce, step forward. Pierce shuffled forward, looking like a man walking to the gallows. You are a disgrace to that uniform, Donnelly said, his voice vibrating with barely contained rage. You bypassed protocol, you violated civil rights, and you ignored the direct warnings of your senior partner. You let your bias drive a police vehicle today. The captain held out his hand. Shield and weapon, now. Pierce gasped, tears streaming down his face. Captain, please. I will not say it twice, Donnelly roared. With shaking hands, Pierce unpinned his badge. He unclipped his duty belt, the heavy leather thudding onto the concrete driveway. He handed his badge to the captain, effectively ending his law enforcement career before it had even truly begun. You are suspended without pay, effective immediately pending a full internal affairs investigation and a referral to the district attorney for civil rights violations, Donnelly stated coldly. Shaw, put him in the back of my cruiser. I'll drive him to the station to process the suspension. Yes, sir, Shaw said. He gripped Pierce by the arm gently but firmly and escorted the weeping ex-cop to the back of the supervisor's SUV. Donnelly turned back to Elias, letting out a heavy, exhausted sigh. Elias, I am so sorry. Welcome to the precinct. Elias offered a tight smile. It's exactly why I took the promotion, Richard. We've got work to do. The badge is a sacred trust. When you use it as a weapon of bias, you don't just betray the public, you betray every good cop who wears it. A few days later at the morning briefing, the briefing room of the 42nd Precinct was packed. 30 officers sat in rows of desks, drinking coffee and chatting as they waited for roll call. There was a nervous energy in the room. Rumors had spread like wildfire over the weekend about Logan Pierce being stripped of his badge in a driveway, but nobody knew the exact details. The door to the front office opened. The room went dead silent. Elias Montgomery walked in. He was wearing a sharply pressed Class A uniform. The brass buttons gleamed. The silver sergeant's badge sat proudly on his chest. He looked like the embodiment of authority. He walked to the podium, looking out over the sea of faces. He saw Officer Shaw sitting in the second row, looking respectful and relieved. Good morning, Elias said, his deep voice carrying easily to the back of the room. My name is Sergeant Elias Montgomery. I am your new watch commander. He paused, letting his eyes meet the gaze of every officer in the room. Some of you may have heard about an incident this weekend involving a former officer of this precinct, Elias continued. Let me be entirely clear. We have a difficult job. It requires courage, it requires instinct, and it requires action. But above all, it requires integrity. If you let your prejudices dictate who you investigate, you are not a police officer, you are a liability, and I will not tolerate liabilities on my watch. He looked directly at Shaw, giving him a brief, respectful nod, acknowledging the veteran who had tried to do the right thing. We police the community by being a part of it, not by treating it like an enemy camp, Elias finished, opening his patrol binder. Now let's get to work. First shift, hit the streets. As the officers filed out, whispering to each other with a newly found respect for their commander, Elias looked out the window. It was a beautiful sunny morning. His Chevelle was safely parked in his garage, spotless and gleaming, and his precinct was exactly where it needed to be, under the watch of a man who knew the law and, more importantly, knew exactly what it meant to uphold it for everyone. A badge is a symbol of public trust, not a license to act on personal prejudice. Sergeant Montgomery's encounter proved that true authority comes from integrity and the law, not intimidation. What did you think of the sergeant's calm handling of this intense situation? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this story powerful, hit that like button, share it with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe for more incredible real-life drama.